Welcome everyone, my name is Marzu and I'm here with Dr. Gabella. She's from Gabella Brain and Spine Clinic.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, and we're gonna talk about neurological disorders and concussions.
Yes.
And talk about some of the effects of concussions when it's not treated.
Okay, so nowadays it's a big topic because we see it happening a lot in athletics, and concussion itself is very horrible for the patient who has it. The rate of suffering and the effects of it and the symptoms. So the problem was for the longest time is we weren't really treating it. We weren't getting them better and addressing these issues. And when that happens and when things become long-standing, people lose their life. So their quality of life goes down the drain. People can't go to the grocery store anymore. They can't tolerate bright lights, loud noises. A lot of times when a patient comes in, you ask them, what is the number one thing that you would like me to do for you? And it's the simple stuff that we take for granted as human beings, like going to the grocery store or hugging our children. Some people can't walk. Some people are wheelchair bound if they're in a car accident or something. So, yeah.
And you have a lot of athletes that play the major sports, football, hockey, who suffered major concussions and they can't live their life the way they would normally would.
Yeah, especially after they retire. So you hear it quite often, and it's really heartbreaking, but the rate of suicide, people destroy their marriages, you see divorce rates out the ceiling, or who they are as people completely change. You know, they rage, they have angry fits, and this all really comes back to our brain is everything on who we are. So it controls our personality, it controls our emotions, how happy, how sad we are, how successful we are in life, and it controls every organ function, so.
And we tend to hear a lot about the early onset of Parkinson's and dementia, and Alzheimer's is the result of concussions and brain injuries going untreated.
Yes, so it's actually really good that nowadays we're actually starting to hear that a little more, because a lot of people didn't realize this. Alzheimer's wasn't coming on until they were like 80. It was a late onset for the elderly, but nowadays you're hearing whether it's Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, or dementia, early onset and no genetic component at all. So it's happening in their 50s. That's huge for us. I mean, that's decades and decades way sooner than it was occurring within 10 to 20 years ago. So what we do know is that we hear about this chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which was exposed in the movie Concussion, and in that stage, you're not seeing that effect of encephalopathy until after they've died, right? And there's an autopsy. So these diseases that are neurodegenerative and they're long-standing, the very first thing to go down south is their saccadic eye movement. So these eye movements that we can record and we have all this data for. We can see this 30 years prior to them ever being diagnosed with dementia, so really? Prior to them losing their mind. So if it's caught 30 years earlier when they're still athletes, when they're suffered their maybe third concussion, and you treat that and you remap their brain, you give them their life back. They can live their life and not forget their children's name, which is a really big deal. And
what happens if you see an athlete who has suffered a concussion but refuses to take the help of a doctor or whatever it is, and they continue to play and they get their second concussion and their third concussion, what process do you take?
So here's the thing is it's better to see you earlier on, right, and treat you right away, but if it's not earlier on, it's better late than never. So the whole thing is our brain, we risk too much when our brain gets damaged and it goes untreated. Unfortunately, for the longest time, we had all this research that tells us about what happens in end-stage pathology or what's the pathophysiology of each neurological disorder, but we weren't necessarily implementing it clinically, meaning we weren't using these modalities to treat patients. But now those services are offered. So there's really, I think the awareness and education is huge, so people to understand, there is help out there, there's hope, because there's so many people that are suffering.
And what are some of the treatment options for neurological disorders?
Okay, so there's many treatment options. The main idea when looking at a patient is you find out what's not working well with them, and then you find out what pathways they have doing really well. And oftentimes we tend to use a lot of eye movements and use a lot of vestibular rehab and somatosensory stimulation. So those three systems are sort of like the jewelry that God gave us to really fire in and remap the whole entire brain. At the end of the day, the biggest concept to understand is our brain can do really high, complex, fascinating stuff, but it goes back down to the more primitive level on its main function. So really the number one function of the brain is to allow us to live in our world and to have a map of our body parts that are completely dead on accurate, and then to map out our environment perfectly so that I can stand up and I can walk somewhere, or I can go running down the road, or I can go eat food, and I'm doing it accurately. I'm not tripping in my environment. I don't go to drink a glass of water and spill on myself, or I don't hit the corner. And those maps are constantly updating because they're dynamic. They're not static, they're not set, and they have to change because this area that we're in right now is going to be markedly different than the bathroom area or being by a pool. And our brain literally, with our vision, we see it, we see our world, and we constantly are mapping where things are, so we unconsciously know. And really, those little gems right there allow us to make massive difference in stroke, in Parkinson's disease, and concussion, and vestibulopathies, people that have balance and dizziness disorders, and neurodevelopmental disorders with children with autism. It comes back to the most primitive nature of like, what is the number one function of our brain? And it's like, it's to live, it's to know where we are, to stand upright. How many animals are bipedal? So bipedal meaning we are the only beast of the field that walks on 2 feet. If we saw a dog that had a 4-foot dog or a 4-legged dog, right? If they walked on 2 feet, if they walked on 2 feet, we'd be like, oh my gosh, it's incredible. Well, it is incredible, and we really take for granted things that we just do every day. And a lot of people can't walk anymore; they're wheelchair bound. But it is really remarkable. So yeah, the brain is fascinating, and we kind of use those glimpses of primitive aspects, and you can remap higher cortical function, cognitive, IQ stuff.
And in dealing with athletes, what are some of the experiences you had dealing with them?
So athletes are fantastic because they're a bit different than the average person. Their brain is much tightly knit, or more tightly knit than a standard everyday person, because they're performing in such incredible situations. So any sport, whether it's hockey, football, basketball, baseball, the demand of their brain, their reaction time, their coordination, all that stuff is much higher than the average person. So when we do baseline test scores, so if we measure the velocity of their saccade or their ability to have fast reaction time that's accurate and dead on, it's way different than standard. So let's say I'm not an athlete, I'm not a current athlete, so my 50% is like an athlete's 25%. Okay. So you really have to get very intricate, and you also have to take them into their sport setting. So in a clinic setting, the environmental demands on the brain are markedly different than being out in a mall, right? And markedly different than playing NBA basketball or playing NHL hockey. So it's very important. So the way I approach care with them is we get them really well, and we get them performing at 100% in a clinic setting, and then you take them into their sport. So a lot of times you take the hockey players on the ice, and we get their autonomic nervous system really high, their heart rate up, and then we do drills, and we do targeting to the net, and and I watch how fast their heart rate goes up, comes down, I watch their oxygen perfusion, and we just go from there, and it's awesome. It's a happy day. You know, you can add in the otolithic vestibular translation, head movements. It's really cool. It makes it fun. Creative.
Dr. Gabella, thank you for
having me.
All right, no problem. This is Max Marzu. I'm here with Dr. Gabella, who specializes in brain rehabilitation.